Celebrate. Hey guys, I'd like to take just a few minutes to thank the staff here. We've got the staff, Corey and all his helpers. We've got the production team, the worship team, the group leaders, and these people all put in countless hours every week to put this together. And why do they do it? Because they love you. They enjoy doing it. And God's put it on their heart to do it. So let's give them a hand. And you know, I was thinking, that name, Celebrate Recovery, isn't that a cool name? I mean, it says why you're here. You're here to celebrate the fact that you've recovered from your hurts, habits, and hang-ups. You've gotten free from those things. And isn't that great? It's a perfect name. Are there some of you out there, though, sometimes, no matter how hard you work, no matter what you do, no matter how good you're doing, you just feel like the whole world's coming down on you? Like, oh man, you're just ready to give up again? Like, there's somebody out there that hates me and wants me miserable. You ever feel like that? Anybody? Yeah. So, I want to ask you a question. What is your lion? Turn to your neighbors and ask them, what's your lion? Lion, as in roar. Okay? Now, as we're talking, think about that, because what your answer is now might change. Now, where I get the lion from is we're going to be talking about Daniel in the lion's den tonight. And just about everybody in this country knows this story, even if they're not a Christian. Hadn't even grown up in church, they know the story of Daniel in the lion's den. So what we're going to do tonight is talk a little bit more in detail about Daniel, his life, and what he went through. All this starts when Jehoiakim is the king of Judah at the time. Nebuchadnezzar goes up to fight him and wins. The Bible actually says the Lord handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to him. Okay? Now, at this point, he's won the battle, and he takes vessels. Okay, we're talking like silver and gold cups, things like that, from God's temple, and takes them and places them in his false God's temple. Then he says, bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from nobility. Can you guess who one of those people were? It was Daniel. So, Daniel's not just some little peon. He's not this guy that's out there working in a fruit vending cart. He's nobility, okay? Now get this. Take them to the land, to his land, and those men are supposed to serve the king. Okay, so now Daniel has been taken from a place where he's pretty highly ranked. And he's going to be a slave to King Nebuchadnezzar. Did you know that he ended up a slave? Not only that, but Daniel's a faithful man, and he has his name changed. King Nebuchadnezzar renames him. And there's 3 other guys that you'll know who were with him. In the names that we're not familiar with necessarily are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Because Nebuchadnezzar changed their names, and Daniel's name was Belteshazzar. These were names for his false gods. Okay? So you've got Daniel, who's a God-fearing man. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are all God-fearing men. They're taken into slavery, insulted by being given a false god's names, and made slaves. So after all this, the king sends these men to be trained for 3 years by his eunuchs. And during that time, he says, I want them to eat my food, my wine. Well, Daniel, he's not going to do that. He does, as it says here, I'm not going to defile myself with the king's food and wine. Okay? So he asks for permission not to eat it. Well, the guy in charge is a little worried about that. Hey, the king's ordered this. I might get in trouble if I do that. So he says, okay, let's do a test. After 10 days of us eating what we want, which is vegetables and water, check us out. If we look healthy, then let us keep doing it. So he did. And after that, God favored him, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Made them very knowledgeable, very wise, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams now. Okay? In fact, they're so wise now that later in the story, the king calls him the wise, 10 times wiser than all of his wise men. So, here we go. Daniel, things are starting to look up again for him, right? Wrong. So, Nebuchadnezzar, this is a bad dude here. He's there's no other way to put it. He has a dream, and the dream scares him. So he calls all his magicians and everybody in. I want you to tell me what my dream was and then interpret it. Of course, the magicians are like, you got to be kidding me. How am I supposed to tell you what your dream was? Well, that made Nebuchadnezzar mad. He says, my word is final. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb. Well, they didn't like that. They said, no one on earth can make known what the king is requesting. What the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, lower G, whose dwelling is not with the mortals. Because of this, the king became violently angry and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Now remember, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had become wise men now. So they're in trouble. The king wants them dead. Well, Daniel hears of this, and he goes to the head man of the guard and says, hey, what's going on? Why is this happening? So he explains it, and Daniel says, okay, hold on. Let me try. So he goes. He and his 3 friends pray about it, and God gives him the interpretation. So he comes to the king. Now, remember, this is a scary thought because the dream was not good. The dream basically says that King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is going to crumble. It talks about a huge statue that's made of different metals. The head is of gold, which represents Nebuchadnezzar, he's told. And a rock comes from a mountain and hits the feet and destroys the statue. Now, if I were the king, that would upset me. But he was appreciative, and he acknowledged the fact that God interpreted this dream to Daniel. So Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged God, but it didn't stick. Remember, this is a bad dude. Next, even though he just acknowledged, oh, your God is wonderful, he builds a 90-foot high and 9-foot wide statue. Now, just to give you some perspective here, I stepped it out, and from here to the back wall is about 50 feet. So it's twice as long, almost twice as long as this room. And you know the story. This is the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego story. He says, when the horns start blowing, everybody's going to bow down and worship my statue. Well, the Chaldeans, which were some of his wise men, didn't like that, or didn't like these 4 men. They were jealous of them because Nebuchadnezzar had given them such authority and power over the kingdom. So, when this happened, in chapter 3, verse 8, it says, some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They went, hey, king, these 3 guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't bow down. I just thought you ought to know. Now, this is interesting to me, how King Nebuchadnezzar responded. He says in verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar asked them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, go ahead and bow. I read that and I thought, man, that sounds like Satan talking to Eve in the garden. Is it really true that God said you shouldn't eat all the fruit? It's okay. Go ahead. You can do it. Well, in this occasion, they didn't fall for it. They did it. They didn't bow down. Or no, they didn't even let it get that far. He says that they refused to do it. And in verse 17, they said, if the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of the blazing fire and can rescue us from the power of the king. Now, this is a good point too, because they recognize that God won't necessarily save them. But they had such faith and love in God that they decided it was best not to violate that love. So, Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage. The expression on his face changed. So he was trying to be nice to him, but now he's furious. He stokes the fire so hot that when the men that are taking them to the oven approach, they were engulfed in flames and burned and died. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fall in. King Nebuchadnezzar says, wait a minute. Didn't we throw 3 men in there? But there's 4 and none of them are tied up. Now notice, Nebuchadnezzar's such an evil person. He's sitting there watching, hoping to see these guys burn to death. Well, of course, you know the story. They didn't get burned. So, after that, Nebuchadnezzar says, I issue a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb and their house made a garbage dump. For there is no God who is able to deliver like this. Then their king rewarded them. So again, he recognizes God as the high one. But you think he meant it this time? No, he didn't. So now, King Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. And he comes to Daniel. And Daniel's really worried about this one. He says to the king, then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was stunned for a moment when he heard the dream. And his thoughts alarmed him. Then he says, my Lord, may the dream apply to those who hate you and its interpretation to your enemies. This one really scared Daniel. I don't want to tell you this. But of course he insisted. So he says, okay, the tree in the dream is you. And then he goes on to tell him, you're going to become like an animal. You're going to crawl on all fours. You're going to eat grass. You're going to lose your mind. And you're going to lose your kingdom. And it's going to stay that way until you acknowledge God the Most High. Therefore, may my advice seem good to you, my king. Separate yourself from your sins by doing what is right, and for your injustices by showing mercy to the needy. Perhaps there will be an extension of your prosperity. And again, he didn't listen. So it happened. King Nebuchadnezzar basically turned into an animal and grazed out there for a while. Now, new king comes to the front. His name's Belshazzar. Belshazzar takes some of the holy implements that they had stolen from Judah, from God's temple, and he's going to have a party with them. Well, he then has a dream, and Daniel tells him what the dream means. Actually, it wasn't a dream. It happened while he was awake. He saw a hand writing on the wall. And Daniel explains it to him. Basically says, you remember the guy that was here before you? He messed up a lot. He had dreams several times, and God kept on trying to change him till finally made him an animal. And you know all this, but you're refusing to listen. So this is what the dream means. And he tells him. And then he died that night. The king did. So now we're on the next king, Darius. Well, Darius remember these men that were jealous of Daniel? Let them convince him that he should put a law in place for a small amount of time that says no one can pray to anyone except my God, your God. And Darius says, why not? I don't see any harm in that. But see, Darius liked Daniel. And the problem is he didn't realize that Daniel prayed 3 times every day. So the Chaldeans started spying on Daniel. They catch him. Now remember, at this point, Daniel's a friend of the king. He's powerful. He's the wisest man there, 10 times wiser than any other magician or wise man there. And he is a governor over a territory. So he's up in a high place again, isn't he? Well, he's just fixing to get kicked back down. They go to him and say, we saw Daniel praying. And remember what you said, king. You said that anyone that does that is going to be thrown into the lion's den. And Darius starts trying to think, is there any way I can keep this from happening? No, you know that it's the law of this country that if you make an edict, it has to be carried out. Okay, fine. We'll do it. But he goes to Daniel and he says, Daniel, I hope your God will save you. And Darius, the king, goes home that night, fasts, and can't sleep because he's so worried about Daniel. Of course, you know the rest of the story. The lions don't touch him. In fact, when he comes out, he's healthy. Darius called out for him, asking him when he comes out. He's so happy, he throws the Chaldeans in because they did all this. And the lions ate them up before they even hit the floor. So what's the point of all this? Well, Daniel had a lot of lions, didn't he? He was up and he was down, just like we all experience all the time. But Daniel didn't let these things get to him. I'm sure, being an imperfect human, it bothered him to have Chaldeans there saying, hey, so-and-so's doing this, you big tattletale. We deal with that today, don't we? At work, kids at school. We've got people that hate Christians and they attack us constantly. So it's nothing new to us. Got thrown into a lion's den? You ever experienced something like that? But what Daniel focused on was the fact that God was there to help him. He kept his faith, knowing it's possible that God won't help me out here. But there's going to be a reason why he doesn't. And if I get killed, eaten up by the lions, it's okay because God will take care of me. So, again, what's your lion? What's the purpose of this story? Why did God put that story in the Bible? Of course, it's a story about faith. The one's about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the one about Daniel. They had faith enough to know that no matter how hard things got, God was going to take care of them. They didn't let the evil one convince them that the whole world is against me. Nobody loves me. It doesn't matter how hard I work, I'm going to fail. I'm always going to be broke. It's so hard to kick this habit. I don't have any support. I'm the only one going through this. Nobody understands. Does any of that sound familiar to any of you? These are thoughts we wrestle with all the time, aren't they? And Daniel didn't let that happen. Neither did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were determined, no matter what they went through, God would take care of them. Here's Daniel, born into nobility, part of the royal family, sold into slavery, given a false god's name, and just had to be there answering the beck and call of all these kings. And then when he finally has some relief, he's got a king that likes him. He's his buddy. His buddy let him down and threw him in the lion's den to be killed. So you think Daniel felt like he was deserted, like he didn't have anybody that loved him? I'm sure he wanted to think that, but he couldn't. He had to keep his faith. And that's what we go through. So my question earlier about the lion is, you may have initially thought, maybe the lion is my addiction. It's whatever my hang-up is. Your lion is whatever Satan is using to damage your faith. And that's the most important thing you've got. Because when it comes down to it, God is all you've got. You've got a family here. We could walk out, go over on the freeway there, and 10 of us get in an accident and die. I mean, it's a morbid thing to think about, but it's true. I mean, just last night, they had thousands of people in Dallas, Texas, lose their homes from a tornado. When they woke up that morning, they didn't think that was going to happen. So that's why it's so important for us to hold on to the one thing that we know we can count on. And we have to do that knowing that God may not make it happen the way we want it to. But the way He's going to make it turn out is going to be for the better. All these troubles that these 4 men went through, and look at the good it did thousands of years later. How many people have been saved after hearing this story about Daniel? How many people have had their faith strengthened because of this story? How many people are being tempted and tried, and they can think about Daniel and be strengthened? Your story, a lot of you here I know have shared your stories with each other, some from the stage. Your stories impact people. No matter how hard life gets for you, you have to remember that where you've come now, your recovery is going to help somebody. Okay? There's somebody in this room, somebody in your family, somebody you have touched in your life somehow that is going to be impacted by your story. And yes, God allowed you to get to that low point in your life. But that's the deal. See, He has to let us make those decisions. But now that you have accepted Him and asked for His help, you've invited Him in, given Him permission to control your life. Okay, now I'm going to do some good out of this. Now I'm going to take your story of when you were down in the dirt, had nothing, were abandoned by all your family and friends, and I'm going to save 3 or 4 more people from your story. Think about that. That's an amazing thought, isn't it? So instead of focusing on our lion, focusing on the hardships that we have been through and the ones we're still dealing with. Every once in a while when we start feeling like the world is crashing down on us and you're the only one that has these kind of problems, nobody else can understand. When that lion starts coming at you, keep in mind that you have recovered. You've made a lot of progress. And God wants to use that to help more people. How many people are in this room, Corey, do you know? 105 people. Okay, let's call it 100 to make it easy. Each of you are probably going to have a positive impact on at least 3 more people in your life. So, you 100 have God has used you to impact the lives of 300 people. Each one of those 300 people are probably going to impact 3 more people. You see how that snowballs? God knows what He's doing, doesn't He? And He loves you guys so much. That's why He's put this team together that works so hard every week. And they love doing it. Corey, I go to the same campus as Corey, and he was talking about that this weekend. How much time he spends here, how early he gets here to get the table set up and everything. And he was talking about the fact that he didn't think he was doing enough, so he was going to start doing more to get more people in here because he wants to help more people. So guys, don't focus on the lion, okay? Remember, King Nebuchadnezzar said that there were 4 people in the furnace when he only threw 3 in? Where'd that 4th person come from? Jesus saved them out of that fire. Okay? Remember, He's always with you. You may not see Him, but He is always with you. I'm on the prayer team at our campus, and we're at Farragut, and it's a portable campus. So every weekend we have to set up the whole church and tear it down. And so every weekend the prayer team prays over the whole building. We walk through the sanctuary, lay hands on every chair in there and pray over it. And this weekend, while I was doing that, walking through the sanctuary, praying over the chairs, the worship team was there practicing. And I prayed, Holy Spirit, fall on this place. Fill this place with God's glory. Let it touch the people here. Fall on the worship team. Let them inspire. And at that moment, I got goosebumps. I got teary-eyed and choked up. And it was like God said, okay, I'm here. All you had to do was ask. I'm ready to go. And that's all it takes. I know it sounds oversimplified, but practice makes perfect, okay? And a lot of you may pray to God and ask for things, but you're not used to hearing His voice because you're out of practice, okay? So the whole point of all of this is I only want you to think of your lion for one reason, so that you recognize it when it's coming after you, so that you can avoid it. And the only way to avoid it is to ask God to help you avoid it. Ask God to remind you of the positive things that has happened in your life. The recovery that you've come through and the way that you are going to impact other people. Thank you.